I am Alberto Villarreal, Managing Director of Nepanoa Transformation Advisory. Today, we'll be speaking to Mauricio Mora, Managing Partner of Instrag, an international public affairs firm based in Mexico City.
Let's start things by asking you about a recent event, and I am very intrigued about your opinion, which is the situation that happened with Constellation Brands as they were developing a plant in Mexicali, specifically in Mexico, and then the government literally asked them to stop. This was pre-COVID, and then we have COVID-19 entering the picture. What's your perspective on foreign investment going into Mexico because of the Constellation Brand situation and then COVID-19? How do you see the future for Mexico based on those two events?
So we see there are two things that are one. We have to go a little bit back and give some context for the people listening that are not very much familiar with Mexico and the new administration. We got a new president, left winging president, left leaning, with a couple of what some people have considered to be populist ideas. One of these was public consultations on different issues, right? So he
Sure.
wanted to go and make a public consultation about continuing or canceling the Mexico City new airport that was a couple of $1 billion investment done by the last administration, and which got canceled after a public consultation. Similarly, he's done other consultations, and we'll get into the details of how these consultations are done, because that's where this resides, right? He wants to do this, the Tren Maya, which is a train that connects Quintana Roo with Chiapas from the Yucatan Peninsula near Cancun all the way to the western Mexico in the southwest Chiapas. He did another public consultation there, obviously won. The one and there have been so just let me give you some background. This has not been established in law, so it's not legally mandatory, so to speak.
Okay.
I mean, the product or the legal outcome of a public consultation, if it's not established in law, it's not mandatory. But that has not stopped this administration from pursuing this. So basically, what we saw in Constellation, similar to the other ones, these publicly organized consultation in which the electoral authority has nothing to do. In the case of Constellation, less than 5% of the registered voters voted on the election. And especially there's no methodology to make it representative as to where do you have to put the ballot boxes, in which areas of the city, blah, blah, blah. So there's all these mistakes of or violations of origin. Mainly, it's legal. Secondly, it's not done to keep some minimal ethical and procedural standards from a statistical standpoint. So those are violations a priori of the consultation. And when you get to the results, obviously the president has been known to speak publicly about this, sometimes in favor, sometimes against. And whatever the consultation says, it's been approved as if it has been done legally and professionally, which has not. In the case of Constellation Brands, it's a 1.4 billion investment in the city of Mexicali, and supposedly this was going to supposed to affect the availability of water, but data shows otherwise, right? For example, last year there were some savings in water in Mexicali, which they don't know what to do with it now. So it's crazy, and what is more dangerous about this is, like you mentioned, this is pre-COVID era, and when we're talking pre-COVID era, we're talking about the impact on investment, on foreign investment that we'll have in Mexico, and about the hundreds of jobs that this plant was going to create, and that's gone away. And not only that, you're not only losing an investment, but what is more likely, Constellation Brands will sue Mexican government
For
and
sure.
will get some of that money back. They supposedly have invested already $900 million, so that's a lot of money. So it's not only they will not come and invest, but it will cost you as a Mexican taxpayer to cancel that project. So
Correct.
and secondly, going to the post-COVID world and what we're living right now, uh, the markets, international markets, especially in Latin America, are competing against each other for these kinds of investments. There's going to be a
Correct.
plant that's going to provide beer for the southwest of the United States, and losing these investments is a terrible sign across the world. Not only because it will make you less leaning to invest in Mexico, because also the safety of your investment is riskier. So now, whatever investment you have in Mexico, if it comes to be a public consultation, regardless of what the law has established, it might risk your investment. So I think it's a terrible signal. I think there are some people inside the current administration that are definitely in favor of this kind of projects, but others that are more moderate that see that this will affect the country and its potential attractiveness for foreign investment.
Mauricio, thank you very much for that insight. The way I see it, I think that in the post-COVID-19 world, Mexico and the rest of Latin America will be a hub of work for North America and also Europe for several reasons. First, you have diversification of supply chain, right? There were a lot of companies working with the Asian market, with Asian companies to provide raw materials for manufacturing, and now they're going to look into Latin America. My perspective is that it's not going to be a full move from one country to another, but there will be diversification. A certain percentage will go to Latin America. And it's unfortunate what you mentioned, because Mexico is suited, it's naturally suited to take advantage of these opportunities. But I take a specific sentence that you said, which is countries in Latin America are competing against each other, are beating against each other for these types of jobs. So in the post-COVID-19 world, let's take manufacturing or let's take services, right, as something or as tasks or as jobs that may move to Latin America in the post-COVID-19 world. Which countries do you see better suited in the region to really grow? Of course, not immediately, because we're assuming that 2020 is pretty much done, but 2021 and in the future, which countries in Latin America do you think are best positioned to grow?
I think Brazil has had some pro-business policies, regardless of the attitudes and the qualities of its president. They've been pro-business in the months they've been in. I think Colombia is set to do well, Peru, but most importantly, I think Mexico has everything to take advantage of this. The only thing that it's lacking, and that's going to be the risk for most of us, or for most of the investments deciding to invest or not in Mexico, it will be a rule of law. And rule of law goes something like these consultations we'll be talking about, but also goes, Mexico has taken a different approach, basically, compared to the rest of the world. The Mexican president just announced that he will have little or no measures. He will not go into acquiring debt to fight COVID economically. And basically what this will have is that the Mexican economy is expected to have a profound recession this year, and a contraction of, some estimates go from 4 to 8%. And will definitely impact when you have some of the reports I've been reading. It's about an estimate that 13 million jobs have been are on risk, out of which right now, actually this morning, the Mexican government presented that because of COVID, we've lost 350,000 jobs, more or less. That's just in less than a month.
Correct.
So that's super interesting. But what I was going with this is, with this impact on investment and the economic contraction, public safety, which has been struggling, Mexico has been struggling with for a couple of years. March has been the most violent month ever recorded. So it's been a continuous growth since last year, and with that public safety issue, I think it will have it will create a more complex environment for Mexico to attract investment. However, I still believe Mexico is super attractive because of the border, right? And effectively with the USMCA coming into action in June and everything that is going on, I think it's still a question mark of how this will develop.
I agree with you, Mauricio. From the negative perspective or the negative connotation that we have is everything that you just mentioned, right? You know, the government's reaction to COVID-19, the constellation issue that we just discussed. We talk about security as well. But at the same time, Mexico has many advantages over other geographies, right? It's the southern border with the United States. We have talent. We understand the culture. There's a lot of people that actually speak English and that know how to work with American and European companies already. And USMCA, under my perspective, it's going to really drive, I don't want to call it a second wave, but more like an 8th, 9th, or 10th wave of business between US and Mexico. How that is going to be implemented is still in the air, right? How companies are going to be able to comply to USMCA is still in the air. But the goal of that agreement is to really unify North America as much as possible as one economic unit. And if performed appropriately, it will really position Mexico specifically for Canadian and US businesses as a really good place to do business. I completely agree with you.
I totally agree with what you're saying, and basically one of the issues that most specialists are foreseeing about this COVID crisis is China losing some of that investment from the U.S.
Of course,
and looking for places to relocate, where Latin America, because of geographic reasons and labor and labor and human capital, might be super interesting. I think that's where Mexico might become, still, regardless of all these issues, attractive. One other issue that we're seeing, and basically Constellation Brands is probably an outlier there, but definitely they'll get paid. But what we're seeing is that Mexican president, if he's being good to someone, is the United States. I mean,
that is true.
That President Trump has insisted in with Mexico, he's achieved. So,
correct,
like I mentioned, with the border in the south, mobilizing the Mexican National Guard to the south. When you remember those threats with tariffs on some goods. I mean, it's interesting how that dynamic plays out, and what everybody believes is that in terms of the Constellation Brands, they'll get paid. I mean, they'll
that is true.
They'll definitely slow. They'll have their plans, but they'll get their money back.
And they'll not only get paid. I mean, maybe they'll continue with that investment just in another part of Mexico as well. I mean, that yeah, exactly. That's not that game hasn't ended yet. You know, they'll definitely. Well, I think they will consider continue with the investment just in another state. Mauricio, we touched briefly on USMCA, and I know that you're very well versed on the agreement, specifically in regards to digital trade. Can you walk us through your perspective? What do you think, or how USMCA will help digital trade or e-commerce between countries in North America?
So I think there's obviously the U.S. and Canada have way more advanced structure or market in terms of digital commerce, e-commerce. Mexico is on the beginning, and it's growing very fast. There's been a lot of complex issues for the Mexican market. Some of the challenges have been around payment processor systems, a lot of fraud online. Mexicans still don't trust their
of course
their digital platforms. with their credit card information. But I think we're obviously since some years we've seen a steady growth. I think that and from a personal perspective, with COVID, it's growing incredible. I mean,
it's going to accelerate it. It accelerated that change for sure.
Yes, I mean, even in countries where they have this established, we haven't seen it, but in Mexico, it's beginning to revolutionize everything. I think both Amazon and Mercado Libre, which is one of the key players in Latin America, have grown exponentially during this crisis, and will continue to do so. And that will definitely impact a lot of what's going on. So you have, on one perspective, you have to take care of that market and those producers in North America to be somehow protected across border. But I think the treaty creates a great balance.
Sure.
I think some of the issues that might be worth mentioning is the exemption for ebooks and some digital products are going to be free. The increment increase of the minimis value.
Yes.
So I think there's going to be a very good integration. Certainly, I believe this is something that will be revised sooner than later, because I think there is like I started this when I mentioned this, there is a Mexico specifically compared to US and Canada, it's at a different stage in terms of digital commerce, and a lot of issues are gonna be coming out in the next couple of years that will be to be revised, but it's gonna be super interesting, and especially looking forward to that cross-border digital buy. It's going to be digital commerce is going to be super interesting.
Yes, I think it's going to benefit both sides, right? I mean, as you mentioned, Canada and the United States, they are years ahead of Mexico. I want to call it just in the business in general, but just in the process of taking a product from the company directly to the customer. And I think this is also going to benefit the Mexican companies that want to sell into the US and Canadian market. It's one of the main pieces of USMCA that I think allows Mexico to actually sell a finished product, a finished good into Canada and the US. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Mexico deals with cyber crimes and with other security measures related to digital trade. That's very interesting, Mauricio.
Just mentioned there, cybersecurity. It's I mean it's been as a service. It's grown also exponentially in recent years. Mexico, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in the last 12 to 18 months, there have been tons of problems around security, especially financial institutions. That's a big area. There are a lot of both American but also Mexican firms developing solutions in cybersecurity, and that's a big potential for the market.
Yeah, and I mean, as we expand on the digital trade between Canada, the US, and Mexico, that also means that there's going to be a lot of information exchanged across borders. So that is going to be the key aspect of this: how to protect all that information. When I bring it to my clients, when we talk about this with my clients, Mauricio, it's always about the software that you have to prevent hackers, to prevent hacks, or to prevent crimes, but they will get through, they will happen. But it's also the software of how you respond, the forensic software that will help you react once you've been targeted, right? Or once you have suffered an attack. But a very important piece that many companies in Mexico do not consider, also in the United States, of course, is the training of resources to be able to spot a threat, or be able to spot a phishing email. That is very important. That is the best way to actually protect against those types of attacks, being able to identify the threat before it even gets through. Mauricio, talking about clients, you've been speaking to your clients right now on COVID-19. What are you telling them to expect for the future of their investments in Mexico? What's your recommendation right now?
So, like you mentioned, we support our clients first face regulatory and put up strategies to minimize their regulatory risk or regulatory impact on their business
Sure.
operations. I think one of the positive things that the president has come out to say in Mexico is that there will be no new taxes, and he's honoring that. I think that it's even too rigorously, like all governments across the world are getting. Like I mentioned, some adding to their debt as percentage of GDP. Mexico has not taken that path very rigorously. And I think one of the good things is that taxes will remain the same. Some of the issues that are that might be impacted is there's been a lot of issues around the legal process of which the emergency declaration was made,
Yeah.
especially regarding labor laws, and if there's some exemptions, so you can pay minimum wage. But some lawyers, there's some legal debate there that will not apply right now. So there's this legality of how the process was done. Secondly, I believe. There was a lot of expectancy of not necessarily my clients, but most of companies in Mexico to get some tax relief or some financial incentives or stimulus. Yes. Mexico's a bit challenging and different from other countries because in Mexico we got a lot of people that work in the informal sector, and how do you help them? How do you make?
How do you
those
help them?
cash
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
exactly.
basically, I think it's definitely cash transfers, social programs. I think that's one of the issues. That's for the informal sector, right? For the formal, obviously, you have all the fiscal tools that you may use. These have not been used yet. There was an announcement that some credits to small business were going to be done recently. For this year, there's some expectancy that some expectations that are completely out of line. The president announced on Sunday that he was going to create 2 million jobs. Didn't specify how. In 9 months, and there hasn't been a period in my mind that Mexico has created 2 million jobs in 9 months. So there's a lot of expectation there. However, I do believe that the main challenge for governments across the world is to help establish functioning, profitable business or operating business that are working right now to be working after this COVID crisis, right? And you have to preserve those companies and preserve those business, preserve those jobs, and there are different tools across the board that are being used by different countries across the world. I don't think Mexico has used all of its tools to do that, to help. So if that happens, definitely it's going to be a contraction is going to be stronger, and the impact on companies and the loss of jobs is going to be higher, right? It all depends, and we've been speaking to a lot of public health authorities across the globe, and there's a lot of uncertainty still, right? Nobody knows how this will end, right?
Or when exactly it will end. That's the issue with this crisis.
So a lot of people are public health specialists are talking even about this go back to work certificates if you have immunity. That you can go back, but then that's only a few jobs going back, right?
That's only a piece, yes.
Yes. So basically, we'll have to wait and see, right? Mexico officially is in quarantine until April 30th. Most specialists believe that it's going to be
May 31st,
and probably go to late June, early July, maybe August. We don't know. It's there's a lot of uncertainty. one of the big challenges that Mexico has done compared to the US or other countries is taking a different approach on testing. Mexico's not doing testing. They're doing estimates based on different models, but they're not doing massive testing. And that really prevents to have a clear scope of where this epidemic is. In the US lay behind. But just to give you some examples, the last data I saw, Mexico has done the equivalent in these 3 weeks or 5 weeks now, I think, since February. Well, probably more. I'm not sure where it was the first case, but I think around
4
cases,
weeks.
it's been 8 to 10,000 tests that Mexico has done, to the most. That's equivalent to what the US does, like I think in 20 minutes.
Yeah, of course.
Today. It's crazy, right?
It's crazy. Yes.
So we're not sure of how this is done, and this is also a very big challenge for Mexico, because we mentioned we have the formal economy. So most people in the formal economy are home, except for those whose business has been declared as an essential business for the country. But that's only 50% of the jobs in Mexico, right? So almost
even maybe less. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Some of the estimates of a study I just saw was 50% of the occupied people, this means working people, is in the formal sector. So
Okay.
You see Mexico City, and you see certain areas, and yes, shops are closed and people are home, but you see some images of the city center where most of this informal activity takes place, and they're crowded.
It's still going.
It's any day. So that's going to be a big challenge. And also, you cannot tell these people live to day, paycheck to paycheck. Tell them to go home and don't work, right? So it's super complex, and that's where I believe that cash transfers should be adopted. There's one bill from a senator from PAN, Damian Cepeda, that has proposed a universal basic income.
Sure.
Similar to what Andrew Yang in the U.S. and others. I don't know if you saw, just Jack Dorsey donated $1 billion yesterday.
$1 billion, yes.
Yes,
I saw it.
And
I mean, we need to make 4 to be able to donate 1, Mauricio.
That's true. That's true. But I think that's one of the issues right now. It's going to be more clear lately, and certainly a scheme of a universal basic income would be super helpful for a lot of people in the informal sector in Mexico.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think we're a little bit behind on this. It's definitely a different approach. I'm not sure this approach will be better. Most of economists that I've heard of in Mexico really support GDP debt, acquiring GDP debt from 1 all the way to 4 or 5 points. I mean, this is when you have to do that, right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, in terms of, just to give you an example of how, we have the lowest rate of beds and ICU beds in the OECD per 1,000 inhabitants, and just to give you some perspective of how difficult this might get into Mexico, the situation might become critical. New York, Governor Cuomo mentioned that for this crisis right now, for the peak, they needed 30,000 ventilators. In Mexico, up to last week, we have 5,000 ventilators for the whole country.
Correct.
Just,
and many of them are in use. And many of them are in use already.
Yes.
It's going to be very complex. Mauricio, I want to, before I let you go, I want to touch on something that you mentioned, which was most of the economy is informal. So even if you as a government tried to provide benefits to them, it would be impossible truly to quantify how much each one of these businesses make. I mean, we're really talking about cash businesses, right?
Yes.
And then you touch on universal income, which is a concept that you and I have discussed at length, for the past 4 or 5 years. And this brings me to fintech and using technology in Mexico as a way to to formalize many of these businesses, to bring them into the economy, but also it provides benefits like this situation, right? If we would be using technology as a way for us to exchange to pay for things, right? Even on the street. Well, that would bring those businesses into the formal economy, and there would be a track. Of course, it comes with taxes that they don't pay, and I get it. But part of the benefits of that would be, well, at least now we know who's actually employed and isn't employed. And if the Mexican government decided to provide some benefits or some stimulus, it would be easier, number one, to track, and number two, to actually provide them to the people.
It's a good point. I think, first of all, let's just familiarize our listeners with this situation, right? And Mexico has lags well behind on people that have access to financial services.
Correct.
And some of those are underserved, right? There are some various and estimates, but probably around 20 to 30% of the people have access to financial services.
Formal financial services, correct.
Yes.
Just pretty much a bank account for
yes.
simple terms.
So it varies obviously from region to region, and with all the caveats. I mean, it's complex, but there's been a growth. I mean, across all Latin America, but Mexico has been definitely one of the big hubs for financial technology. We were one of the first countries to develop a law that regulated crowdfunding, payment systems, e-wallets, crypto. I mean, it was one of the most innovative regulations. It ended up being a little bit over-regulated because of the perspective that the authorities had at that time.
Sure.
But still, it has led to a big area of opportunity for investment. There are dozens of Mexican fintechs, some of which have had access and have actually gotten a lot of capital from international markets. They're very, very competitive, and it has been very interesting, providing financial solutions to people that are either underserved or not served at all. And I think there's a big opportunity there in fintech. Brazil has had a positive experience like that. Colombia as well. I think those are the three major markets that are leading the way in Latin American fintech. Similarly, some of the like Nubank is coming to Mexico. There are some other digital banks like Albo.
Stripe opened an office in Mexico as well.
Stripe is in Mexico. Some of the big digital banks in the UK are looking forward to opening in Latin America. So it's going to be a very interesting path how this develops. Mexican banks have responded very well to COVID situation. They voluntarily made up a program to defer payments without interest for I think it was 4 to 6 months. I mean, they came up big with this, and definitely will be a relief for a lot of medium business that have access to their accounts, and for people with personal debt. But I think we'll see a big growth in fintech in Mexico in the next couple of years. I mean, it's definitely
I completely agree.
A lot to do.
I completely agree. I think it's a trend that we had seen, that we were experiencing already, and I think COVID-19 will only accelerate it. Just to recap on those numbers that you mentioned, and you're right, I should have provided them to our listeners. Yes, access to the formal financial sector for the average, not for the average, for the Mexican population, it ranges between 70 and 80%. That's what Mauricio mentioned, right? Which means that 70 or 80% actually don't have a bank account or a credit card, right? And when we look at it from a cell phone perspective, actually, I've read estimates that 90 to 95% of the country actually has a cell phone. So you really have an opportunity there where people are carrying their mobile device, but they're not part of the financial sector. That's why there's so much interest from fintechs around the world to actually go into Mexico and Latin America, right, to try to provide services to this huge market.
One of the big issues regarding Mexico and the U.S. is I just forgot the word in English. Remittances.
Say it in Spanish. Say it in Spanish.
Remittances.
There you go.
The remittances are coming down this year, definitely in the U.S. I mean, this is one of the issues not a lot of people are talking about, but certain states for Mexican immigrants or all kinds of immigrants in the U.S. Not only they're lacking health services, they're also with a job. I mean, it's going to be super difficult for them. It's
Correct.
being very difficult for them, and definitely that will have an impact on remittances sent to Mexico. There's been a good story about a lot of companies that are working towards remittances solutions from the U.S. to Mexico, cutting costs significantly. I mean, that's one of the great positive stories, and we'll definitely continue to see that over the next couple of years. I mean, there's a lot of efficiencies to be done there. I mean, just sending money from Chicago to
Of course.
a small town in Chiapas used to cost a lot of money, and those costs are coming down.
Correct. Mauricio, thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to connect and providing different perspective on the U.S., Mexico, and Latin America relationship.
Yes, thank you, Beto. And also, if you have more specific doubts in terms of any regulatory issues, please visit us at instrag.mx, and we can help you out solve some of those, or address some of those regulatory risks your business might have in Mexico.
Sounds fantastic, Mauricio. Take care.
Stay safe.